day 3 in Crusader 50. The crew and the cast are still talking to each other.
Hello and welcome to yet another Tin Dog podcast. This week's show opened with a very nice sample, taken from this week's Doctor Who Confidential. That was David Troughton doing a variant on my very own accent. Obviously it wasn't an impersonation of me because, as has already been said, I'm really not the voiceover on Big Brother. After all, if that was my job, when would I possibly find time to talk about Doctor Who? Before I begin this week's Tin Dog podcast and talk about my thoughts on Midnight, I've just got a few housekeeping announcements. First off, there's a message for everyone who's bought The Invisible Enemy on DVD. Apparently, there's a fault with the discs, so if you want to check to see if this affects your disc, which it may probably do, find episode 3, about the 21 minutes 10 seconds mark, when Tom Baker says, "Get out of my head." It leaps forward to the final scene in the lab where the shrimp thing appears, and this continues to about 22 minutes 7 seconds, when you begin to hear the end of the episode, and then it jumps back, which kind of messes up the whole episode. If this is the case, do not worry. Simply send your disc, not to me, it's alright, to the address that I'm about to read out. It's okay, I'll put the address on the show notes on www.tin-dog.co.uk, but here's the address. DVD Support, 2 Entertain, 33 Foley Street, London, W1W 7TL, and they'll post you a very nice replacement. Another small note is for people currently awaiting the DW WhoCast. Apparently they've had a few issues uploading this week and next week's show. Don't worry, I'm sure it'll all be sorted very shortly. And finally, on a sad note, normally I dedicate every TDP to someone who's helped with the running of the show. This week I'm going to dedicate it to the memory of Stan Winston, who died this week. Apparently Stan had been ill for a while. Now, for those of you who don't know, Stan Winston's a very important special effects designer and what some people would probably call an Imagineer, someone who brings concepts from movies to life. The films he's worked on are just an enormous list of the best sci-fi ever. CGI can only take you so far. Eventually you have to fall back on a real practical prop, and that's what Stan Winston and his team were famous throughout the world for. Stan, your work was wonderful. So here's to you, Stan. Right, this week's Doctor Who, Midnight. You see, when the Doctor says,
"Taking a big space truck with a bunch of strangers across a diamond planet called Midnight? What could possibly go wrong?"
you just know it's all going to go horribly wrong very, very shortly. However, horribly wrong for the Doctor is horribly right for us, the audience. Some people have referred to this episode as a bottle episode, and some of you may not be aware of exactly what bottle means. I am aware that some of my listeners are younger than others, so please bear with me. The first time I ever heard the term bottle episode, it was referring to a Star Trek episode, Star Trek The Next Generation, where, in a series, the budgets were running low, and they needed to create an episode that used available sets and wouldn't cost the Earth. This is where the phrase "ship in a bottle" would come from, and that was eventually shortened to bottle episodes. I could be wrong, but this is what I was told. And again, this story is referred to as a bottle story by many, many viewers. It's not quite fair. It is the companion light story, and by that I mean Donna's hardly in it. This was to allow her to film next week's story, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Rather than think about this as, say, a bottle story, something with a limited budget, it's probably best to think about it in terms of the classic Doctor Who series, a show which traditionally had very, very little cash to play with, and so would fall back on the thing that the English were very, very good at making: small, character-driven drama. And Doctor Who was fabulous at this. For me, this story compares best not with Robots of Death, as some people have done, but with the horror of Fang Rock, a small, tight-knit group under attack from an external force, bickering and fighting amongst themselves to see who can survive. But even then, those comparisons break down when you compare it with the two things which obviously influenced the story early on. It has been said that the two major influences on this story are two very specific, very, very old episodes of The Twilight Zone. The first one, which I believe was called Terror at 50,000 Feet, but I'm sure, as a child, I referred to it as The Thing on the Wing, and another episode called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which is a marvellous look at paranoia at its best. Now, I could go into great depth about how society defines itself through its fiction, and 1950s paranoia science fiction can be used to illustrate this absolutely perfectly, and The Twilight Zone is no exception. In fact, it's a wonderful example. But the real monsters in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street are the people. You do see some aliens at the very end, but it's the way they turn on themselves. They take the events which have happened externally and turn them in on themselves. Here we have an actual possession, and so it is considerably closer to The Thing on the Wing. At this point, I would love to be able to play samples from Third Rock from the Sun, but as I don't actually physically own those, you'll just have to believe me. And one day after you've seen The Thing on the Wing, either the one from the Twilight Zone movie with John Lithgow or the original with William Shatner, and you come across a certain episode of Third Rock from the Sun, you will laugh yourself silly. So rather than examine the origins of the story, let's examine the story and the characters themselves. First off, we are fairly limited in the amount of special effects seen and used in this story. The alien planet, and indeed most of the world and the transport itself, are revealed to us through 3 glass shots. Now obviously they're not really glass shots, they'll be CGI'd, but those 3 still shots, zooming in, out or just locked off, give us an immediate impression of the world, just enough so that we know exactly what's going on, and we know what the Crusader vehicle looks like from the outside, we know what the planet looks like. Our imaginations have filled in all the gaps, so that when we're exposed to the claustrophobia of the actual story, we know there's an outside world. Trapped inside the vehicle are some of Britain's best actors. Alice Troughton, that's Alice Troughton the director, no relation to any of the Troughtons, be it Patrick or indeed David as seen in this story, previously seen in other Doctor Who tales. He was of course Prince Peladon, and I'm sure he was in the War Games at some point, but he was so quiet in the War Games as to almost not be noticeable. Troughton's performances are universally good. I have had the pleasure of seeing him on stage in various RSC productions, and if ever you get the chance, just go. But if this show belongs to anyone, it's not David Tennant, despite his fabulous portrayal in this story. No, it's definitely Leslie Sharp, who'd been seen in Russell T Davis's Bob and Rose, but slightly more spookily in ITV1's drama Afterlife. I strongly recommend you track down Afterlife if you enjoyed the eeriness of this particular story. I mean, how fabulous was it when the thing had finally got on board, or through the door, or perhaps it hadn't, and the camera slowly panned in on her face, and you were thinking, this is going to be a combination of latex and CGI. It's going to be either great or really, really bad. And then she turned around and there was absolutely nothing wrong with her face whatsoever, which of course was as scary as it gets. There's that thing that people get taught on writing courses. The shortest science fiction story ever. You may have heard this before, and I'm sorry if you have. The story goes something like this. The last man on Earth sat alone. There was a knock at the door. And that's it. The world's shortest science fiction story. Or is it horror story? Doesn't matter. That's what this story reminded me of. Nothing could possibly live outside, according to science, but something did. And something got on board. And its only weapon seemed to be talking. The fact that the first humans it met simply turned on it were wonderful. On the commentary, Russell talks about this story being antithesis of Voyage of the Damned. And in many respects it is. In Voyage of the Damned, all of the characters pull together to try and survive, and in this everyone just turns on each other. Now, which of these things is true human nature? It doesn't really matter, because we know which one makes better drama. And my God, this was Russell's best script. You take away the effect, you take away the large story, you give him a deadline, you give him something as constricting as this story, and he pulls out something as marvellous as this. If this was Russell's last ever script, he could be proud of it. Prouder than he could be of anything else. Now, I know not everyone loved this story. Some people want larger story arcs. Some people want more hints at things, more galactic events. But to me, this was Doctor Who as well. This was Doctor Who at its best. We saw the Doctor have his ability to run away removed. We saw him without a companion, which we'd only ever seen in The Deadly Assassin. And without those things, with only his intelligence left, he almost ends up dead. This was truly magnificent as a story. Sadly, for those of us in need of a larger story arc, there was one slight nod, and that was Rose appearing on the monitor with what appeared to be the same footage that we saw on the monitor in the Sontaran story. Now, for me, this confuses matters just a tiny bit. I was under the impression that Rose was in a continuum very similar, time-wise, to the one where the main Doctor Who action takes place. A universe which I'm going to call ours, but quite clearly, as we've not been invaded by Cybermen or anything like that, to my knowledge, isn't. You know what I mean. You've seen the show. So, Rose is in Pete's world, which is the last we knew, and she's trying to communicate with the Doctor, which was perfectly acceptable. All of the signals we've received from her and all the pictures of her were corresponding roughly to the time that we are currently experiencing. The fact that there's a 3-year time gap could be explained away by saying that the first Cyberman story actually happened 3 years previous in the overall scale of things. But I do have a little theory, obviously something that I've just sort of invented, as to how we have Rose communicating with the Doctor in what is definitely the future. The reason I know it's the future is because they refer to classic Earth archive material, when the hostess, who is never named, so the Doctor asking, does anyone know her name at the end, is a little bit annoying. You see, the planet Midnight, we don't know where it is in the universe. So say it's 2,000 years in the future, but also say it's 2,000 light years away from Earth. Faster than light travel in the Doctor Who universe is said to exist and also simultaneously said not to exist, so let's assume that indeed it is. It does. It has to, on the grounds that the Ood are delivered via a different galaxy. Yes, I know many people have major issues with the idea of us visiting other galaxies, but this is, after all, a Doctor Who. And so the signal in itself, because it's travelling at the speed of light, gets to travel in time and reach the Doctor. The signal would probably tune itself into the sonic screwdriver or something along those lines, and then reveal itself to the Doctor. But of course he's always looking the other way. Another thing that I kind of noticed or noted was that the way they know the Doctor is the Doctor, and that possession and mind transference is going on, is that the alien-possessed creature uses Italian phrases in French, which is great. But what's everyone else hearing? If we think back to the Pompeii story, is everyone else hearing Welsh? If ever there was evidence that somebody was an alien, hearing Welsh, I'm not sure would register that highly on that list. Unless, of course, you were a member of Torchwood. Before I go, I just want to mention a few things that I kind of forgot to mention in last week's re-record. The first, of course, is something that bothered me quite a lot about the whole library thing. Why would a library have a self-destruct? I've visited libraries in my time, and I can quite categorically say that, to the best of my knowledge, I've never come across a self-destruct, and also, why would you put a self-destruct in a planet? A planet that, admittedly, before you moved there was mainly trees. Secondly, the thing I forgot to talk about last week was when the shadow creatures suddenly got a voice and the Doctor could reason with them. That really detracted from the enjoyment, because it made the monsters more human, when beforehand, of course, we'd been told that they were just piranha in shadow form. Not like that got in the way of the enjoyment of the story at all. 3 fantastically enjoyable episodes back to back. And of course next week, by the looks of the coming soon, we get to find out what's on Donna's back. From the fraction of a frame that we caught, it looked like some sort of beetle, rather than, say, a John Pertwee spider. But as I only caught it for less than 1/24th of a second, I'm more than capable of being wrong. So until we get to experience this season's Dr. Light story, but companion-heavy story, and enter the exciting world of Rose and Donna, with of course extra Bernard Cribbins, I'll leave it there. So until then, be seeing you. You have been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Contact us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk.